I doubt anyone is going to come within the next 15 seconds, so we'll get started right away. So today we're going to be covering two short stories, right? The Hell Screen, which is a translation of a Japanese short story, which was published at the beginning of the 20th century, and Frantz Kafka's Penal Colony short story. So I hope we've all read that. And in case it wasn't obvious, perhaps, especially I think the Hell Screen, maybe less so with the Penal Colony, there's an incredible psychological undertone to both of those short stories. And that's kind of the perspective that we're going to be taking on it today. So the first part of class is going to be centered around what exactly we do when we try to analyze a text psychologically. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, this is not necessarily an easy thing to do, right? Surprising as it may seem, the human mind, right, or any mind, is not a particularly easy thing to grasp. It's almost like we've been trying to get at it through poetry for thousands of years. And so it's inevitably kind of difficult to do. But what I think psychoanalytic or psychological approaches, they're not quite the same thing, but for the purposes here, we'll just kind of lump them together. What it does is try to give us some kind of method to actually approach this. Key here is not a scientific method. No psychoanalyst worth his salt ever, or herself, ever claimed that it was a scientific method, but it is certainly a method. But I am curious, before we actually get into the meat of it, when I say a term like psychoanalysis, what's the first thing that comes to people's minds? Yeah.
Sigmund Freud.
Freud, great. What else? Maybe something about Freud, if you have that in mind. Go ahead, Ed. Okay.
Explain in French.
Id, ego, superego?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to talk about those, definitely, right? Nothing else? Psychoanalysis, just first thing. It has kind of gone out of favor as a method of analysis, but I still think it's with us in many ways that we're not necessarily conscious of. Anyway, yep.
Not sure if it counts, but Pavlov.
Yeah, in some ways, he was very much inspired by it. Mm-hmm.
Disorders, mental disorders,
Okay.
like state of minds.
Mental disorders, state of minds, absolutely, right? And really, the reason why we're not going to start with the PowerPoint, which is why I'm not putting it in full screen yet, but one of the key questions I think that psychoanalysis comes to is not necessarily what the mind is, right? It's very difficult to actually start any kind of definition of that. But I put where is my mind in this case might be a little bit more of a complicated question. But you can also ask questions like, how is my mind, right? The mental disorders that people might seek help for. Why is my mind the way it is? All of these other questions might be associated with psychoanalysis. I'm surprised that no one said sex, right? Not because I'm expecting it to be taboo, but I'm sure 10 years ago, that would have been the first thing in most people's minds, right? At least, it is a valid thing to think about because it was the core of a lot of Freud's and Lacan's and other people's thought process. And even if we're not necessarily going to approach sexuality itself through the texts that we talked about today, unless you have a particularly different reading than I do, it is nevertheless an important part of psychoanalytic theory that I do want to mention, at least in introductory remarks that I'll be giving soon, right? Some of you might have heard of the famous Oedipus complex, right? Is that term ringing a bell for anyone? Yeah, Adam. It's quite famous, a bit disproven since then, or at least modified since then, but it has been very useful to the field of literature. Right? Famously, Freud would analyze Shakespeare's Hamlet through the Oedipal complex. So, it does have its value still to this day. And I would argue maybe the Hell Screen has a bit of an Oedipal aspect to it, but we may or may not come to that. It depends how the conversation goes today. But I wanted to start off, right, with, of course, some music, because why not? Music can be a form of literature in many ways, especially with the lyrics that we analyze. The first one is a song by The Fall. Does anyone know The Fall? I would be honestly shocked if anyone did. They were very popular in like the 70s, early 80s as like a post-punk group. And post-punk as a genre, post-punk as a genre very much tried to incorporate psychoanalysis and psychological trauma into its music. It's a very short song. Well, short. It's 3 minutes. So it's an average song. But I want you to pay attention to the lyrics, which is why I put them up here on the screen. I don't know if I can actually... Yes, okay, so you can see them a little bit better here. So I want you to actually pay attention to the lyrics and try to figure out why this might be important to any kind of understanding of our human psychology, right? Especially our psychology in the modern era when they would have been writing this song. So I'll start with this song. I might play a second song afterward. We'll see. A much more famous song that you've probably all heard on the radio. Oops. Anyway, what do we make of this? Right? Why would I have played this particular song right now? Do we need a minute to kind of let it wash over us? I can start playing the other song that I wanted to play. I just wanted to play the first few chords of it. This one I'm sure you've heard before. Yeah. Anyone who played like the radio for maybe 5 minutes probably fell upon it because it's just constantly on. But if you've ever paid attention to the lyrics, they do offer quite a bit of interest for today's class. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. So we'll stop it there. So why might these songs matter for our mind? Right? Or what does it say about our mind? Yeah.
Our mind really searches for pleasure.
Okay, pleasure, absolutely, right? It's right there in this particular song that we just talked about, right? Help me make the most of freedom and of pleasure, right? That's part of the sexual component that we were talking about earlier, but not just that, right? That's the obvious association that we can make. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's the excitement.
Yeah, absolutely, excitement. I'm drinking a cup of coffee now, right? Because it gives me a little bit of pleasure, right?
You're wired on coffee.
I'm totally wired, right? You might have noticed that from me in general, right? I'm a jittery person. It might be because I drink too much coffee. It might just be also because I'm psychotic, right? I don't know, right? I would have to actually see a psychoanalyst for that, right? The first song that we played by The Fall does get at that pleasure principle as well. Milady, did you have your hand up or are you? No? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Mia. Okay. It doesn't want to comply to the world's expectations, right? What does it want to do instead? Okay, yeah, seek pleasure. There's not one single answer to this. The pleasure principle is one. Freud himself would define all kinds of drives, right? Lacan as well. Probably the most famous one is the death drive, right? We kind of make jokes about it as Gen Z / millennial people. Haha, the world's ending, I kind of want to die type of thing. But Freud would have a field day with that kind of response to the world around us. He would say, yeah, we all do, right? The difference is how do we actually respond to that kind of desire, right? For the ultimate release of death, right? Some people go completely insane. Right? Others repress it. Others transfer it onto other people. Right? Again, hint to the kind of literature that we're reading today. Transferring our own death drives onto others might be a key to what we're analyzing, right? Especially in the Penal Colony, but the Hell Screen, I would say, as well. Right? Good, absolutely. So one of the things that comes up in both songs that I also mentioned, right, is very much this thing that it's not at the forefront of our mind, right? Nobody goes around saying like, yeah, I'd really like to torture someone, right? Like if you do say that, seek help immediately, of course, right? That's not the point. Or no one goes around actively saying, I'm really depressed today, right? it's not usually the case. Some people do. Some people are quite open about their feelings of depression, of course. But what psychoanalysis did, right, at the beginning of the 20th century was come along and say, well, instead of us actually expressing it out loud, right, usually what we tend to do is put it somewhere, right? Where does it go? Beyond the consciousness. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, good. The unconscious. No, please. Yeah, you were going to say the unconscious? Good. Now, the question is it actually a good thing to put these things into our unconscious? I'm genuinely curious what you would say to that. Is it good to just put these feelings and emotions, traumatizing or not as they might be, into our unconscious? Yes, Adam.
Rarely, yes.
Rarely, yes. Okay.
Definitely more than no. Because repressing those types of feelings in the long run will just make it worse and worse.
Okay.
It's better to get it out somehow.
Okay.
Which I guess is kind of like what psychoanalysis does, like you said, where it shows like where we, without expressing it clearly, as you said, we tend to like put our like hidden thoughts into our actions or into like everything else we do.
Yeah.
Like let's say like maybe like anger issues could stem from something very deep inside.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone want to add to that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So, yeah, go ahead.
Like, one of the things that the something is the fact that we kind of live in anxiety or being controlled. So, but let's say most of the experience, so they just go on living that.
Yeah. Yes.
Everything that's repressed eventually is going to come out as neurosis. So, like, as like, well, I'm just like reading from my notes from another class where we talked about Freud.
Good.
But like, basically, like he said, when you repress stuff too much, too long, eventually it's gonna come back to you.
Good. So, what class was this? Out of curiosity.
Sexuality and representation.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. So, part of this interest, right, is absolutely to say, or I should highlight here, it's not always a bad thing, right? And Freud wouldn't say that either, right? He would very much come down on the side of there are some things that it's good to actually kind of bring down, right? Or at least to leave into our unconscious, as long as, you don't actually act upon it, right? Because if everyone acted on their unconscious desires, society would basically run amok, right? That's his point. The thing for Freud is not that you should actually repress it, is that you actually deal with it in a way that's constructive and healthy, right? And as I alluded to earlier, psychoanalysis is one of those things that has kind of gone through the ringer lately. We mostly paint Freud today in the 21st century as this cocaine addict who was obsessed with childhood sexuality. Hence the Oedipal complex. You want to kill your dad and marry your mom, that kind of stuff. But that is a gross oversimplification of what psychoanalysis can actually do, right? Which is, again, to try to get at some kind of method for understanding this messy thing that we have in our skull, right? Which is, an incredible machine in many ways. Actually, calling it a machine is doing it a disservice, right, to what our brain and imagination can actually do, right? Okay, so I've been kind of rambling on about a bunch of different things right now. Like I said, this is mostly just some kind of introductory idea, right, that I wanted to bring about. Just the core concepts of psychoanalysis. If we wanted to put it in visual terms, right? Because the last class we kind of went with some visual descriptions of stories and so on, right? If we wanted to visualize the project of psychoanalysis, it might look a little bit like this, right? Where here at the top, we have what? What might be here at the top as we come into this diagram? We kind of already mentioned it.
Wait, can you say it again?
What might, if we enter in through here, right, through the psychoanalytic project, what might be at the forefront? What people see or engage with first? Yeah, good, conscious. Sorry if that question was unclear. Like I said, psychoanalysis is kind of difficult, so we're condensing it here for the purposes of today's class. Right? Good. At At the end, we would have what, right? Opposite the conscious? Unconscious. Good. Every time I write conscious and unconscious, I'm like, I don't think I wrote it correctly. And I'm convinced I haven't written it correctly right now, but you all understand what I'm saying, so it's fine. Now, here's where it gets interesting for us, right, in literary studies, okay? And what kind of became the bread and butter of psychoanalysts for, since actually it was created. What gets us from the conscious to the unconscious? I'm sorry?
Subconscious?
No, actually. The subconscious is not really a thing in psychoanalysis. The subconscious is one of those terms that people apply to the unconscious without realizing that subconscious implies that it's below the consciousness or less important, which it isn't. Yeah.
And maybe the ego?
Ego could be one of it. What's even more famous for psychoanalysis? You had your hand up.
Passions and desires.
Okay, yeah, which are expressed in... Good. This was a long and rambling way to get to why this matters for literature, right? One of Freud's most famous works, right, is a book or a series of lectures that was later turned into books called The Interpretation of Dreams, right? Which might start ringing bells in your minds of why this matters to literature, right? Literally, he's interpreting stories that we tell ourselves in our minds, right? Now, to put it in, again, very simple or straightforward terms, to Freud and to other psychoanalysts, dreams were important because, like I said here, they were a kind of gateway into the unconscious, right? You repress things throughout your day, throughout your years being alive, throughout your week of work. You repress them deep down, and the only way that your brain finds to actually tell you about these things is through these bizarre, disjointed, highly symbolic stories that fire into your brain while you sleep. One of the examples that he gives, if I remember correctly, in the interpretation of dreams, I think it's in that book. It's still an example that he gives. It's a kid who's traumatized, right? Has anyone ever heard this story? It's a kid who's traumatized and he keeps dreaming of horses, right? He keeps associating horses to his father's death, right? And it's kind of the whole thing. This kid is very sad because of it, because as you would, right? No one or very few people actually want their dad to die, right? And what Freud's kind of psychoanalytic thought process behind this in the analysis of the dream, he realized that way back when, before the kid could kind of remember and acknowledge what he had seen, he was out on a walk with his dad and he had seen a horse die in the streets, right? Which was a traumatizing experience for that kid, right? And in his mind, that created an association between the horse's death and his father's death, right? Yes?
Well, to say this, but
Yeah.
dreams, they are like, in the first flame of the dreams, it seems like totally different, but behind all this, we have the least desire. All the least desire we have in life, the unconscious pulling in our dreams,
Yeah.
and it's feel like we are led by our desire in life.
Yes, absolutely. Right. I think that's very well put, right? Dreams, if they weren't dreams, they wouldn't necessarily be straightforward, right? You never receive a direct indication from your dreams as to what you're actually feeling, right? And that's the key to why it's an interpretative practice, right? That's very close to literature. Because what a psychoanalyst does is look at context and look at the story, the dream, right? And see how we got from A to B type of thing. And then from B back to A. I think that's very good, Liam. Liam, yeah? Okay, good. Excellent. So this is something that we need to keep in mind, right? From its inception, psychoanalysis is almost explicitly, if not put in those terms, right, tied to a kind of literary practice. Okay? And again, to come back to the other elements that we've discussed throughout the past weeks, this is something that that ties into structuralism, right? Looking at the structure of our mind, if you will, or even to reader response, right? How do we respond to the world around us? And it's no surprise that something like psychoanalysis would emerge right around the same time as these other forms or attempts to understand the world. Okay? This would especially kick off in World War I. Surprise, surprise, right? We keep coming back to World War I. It's almost like people were trying to understand what had happened to them. It is a traumatizing experience for a lot of people. Quite literally, a traumatizing experience. And so where psychoanalysis comes in specifically with the war is for people who have shell shock, for example, right? For anyone who's taken a war and literature class, you might have talked about this, but shell shock is literally your body, right, responding in a very physical way to the trauma that you would have repressed, right? You see your friends get shot, you see, the land that you usually live on, you see your home, you see your family getting annihilated, and you have to move on, right? As a soldier, you have to keep pushing through. So the only choice you have is to push it deep, 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 deep down, right? But you can't keep that kind of trauma down, right? And this is still something, of course, that you see in the 21st century, right? With any kind of conflict or, traumatic situation, right? It has to come out somehow. And that's where shell shock comes in, right? You actually physically respond to it. Okay? Did you have your hand up, Melody, or you were just... So the... what was I going to say? Yeah, I'm using, right, the example of war because it's a really powerful one here, of course, and it's an easy one to take, but you have to go into that traumatizing of a situation to see how psychoanalysis can play into even our everyday life. Just as a show of hands here, how many of you in your lives had said something like, "Oh, I didn't mean that," after saying something kind of mean, right? Psychoanalysis, baby, right? If you didn't actually mean what you said you meant, what did you mean to say, right? Are you lying, right? Did you actually mean to say that mean thing to your mom or whatever? Or is there something deeper, right, that you're actually not telling anyone? Right? These are the kinds of questions that you can ask yourself, right? Yes, that's exactly a Freudian slip. Yeah, exactly. That's like the peak example of a Freudian slip. But there's plenty of ways that can take place as well, right? Instead of saying a boot, you say a butt, right? And haha, it's funny in the moment, but Freud would be like, why is that in your mind, right? Why is that what came out in your conscious desires, right? Right. So funny. It's a funny version of this, but it still applies. Does this all make sense so far in some way? Yeah. You seem unsure, man. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that was basically a little bit on dreams and the unconscious. I forgot to actually bring it up here, so let's see if what's the... Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry, Mark Fisher. Did anyone read the Mark Fisher text for today, or the excerpt? Yeah, some people did. Okay. I want to see if I can find the excerpt again. If not, I'll just log into Studium. Did anyone aside from Francesca actually read the... No? Okay. Yeah, a bit of it. Yeah, it was a bit long. It's part of the introduction to, I think it's this one. Was this it? No. Yeah, Beyond the Unheimlich. Yeah. Me trying to speak German. Unheimlich? Yeah. Mm-hmm. We'll just log into Studium and get to it. So what I had put up on Studium was an excerpt of a wider text that he wrote. It was actually his last text before he committed suicide, on the weird and the eerie, right? And part of the reason why I wanted to give Mark Fisher for this class is because he is someone who was firmly invested in understanding people's trauma and desire, because he actually did go through quite a bit of depression in his life, as evidenced by the fact that he took his own life, right? But he's, I think, a very good writer, personally. He's kind of like or he was a very approachable version of theorist Frederick Jameson, if anyone has ever read him. But for those of you who actually did read it or part of it, you will recall that part of this text, which is the introduction to the Weird and the Eerie book that he made, is very much inspired by Freudian theory, right? And specifically one term in Freudian theory, which is what exactly? He brings up like one in particular. Starts with a U. Yeah, good, the uncanny. What did you get? Did you understand what the uncanny was based from the text?
Well, he says unhomely, so
Yeah, so that's the literal translation, right?
I guess homely, when we look at it like that, it's approachable.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Good.
unhomely, not approachable.
Not approachable. That's a good connection, right? I like that, right? So anyone else? Yeah. Go ahead, Mindy. Yeah.
They translated it to
Yeah.
They said that what's different from weird and eerie is that it's strange within the familiar.
Yes. Exactly. Good. So it's strange within the familiar. It's something that you can technically recognize, right? But it's slightly off kilter, right? Has anyone ever seen, right, images of like a straight line or a square, right? And one of the sides is just slightly off, right? Like a square that the side is not quite at 90 degrees, right? So there's one thing, it almost looks like a square, and you can technically recognize it as such, but there's just one thing that brings it over into, that's not quite right, right? And that's kind of what the uncanny is getting at, right? Is your brain kind of responding to something that you are not quite recognizing in the way that you should be. Okay? One of another good example, and this might be especially true in the 21st century, we've all seen Hollywood blockbuster movies, right, with massive budgets, right? They use a lot of computer imagery and computer-generated imagery, what we call colloquially CGI, right? Has anyone ever seen, like, people attempt to make humans with computer-generated imagery, right? And they look kind of rubbery and not quite right? That would also fall into the uncanny, right? You look at it and you can technically recognize that they're trying to make a human, but something's not right. Usually it's like the skin or the eyes, right? They look dead inside. So that's usually what we're getting at with the uncanny. Okay? And Fisher is really interesting because he uses this idea, right, this core concept in psychoanalysis of the uncanny, our brain kind of misfiring for a second, to expand on what he sees as weird fiction, right, or eerie fiction. So I have, for those of you who read it, what's the difference between weird and eerie, as he calls it? Sorry.
So the weird is what doesn't belong.
Yeah.
The eerie is questions with existence and non-existence. So why is something there when it's not?
Or why is something not there when it technically is? Right. Good. Right. So Fisher kind of distinguishes between these two forms of fiction. Right. Weird on the one hand, something coming in. He mentions it here. I had copied it into my notes. Where is it? Yeah. He even calls the weird at some point, right, a montage, a conjoining of two or more things which don't belong together, right? So something either that comes into the world and changes that world, as we talked about last week, right? Which is what Lovecraft kind of gets at. The monsters and the whole city, the weird city that's in the Antarctic, is something that technically exists, and it merges with something that we know of, right? The Antarctic. And it together, in becoming this new world, makes something weird. Okay? Whereas the eerie, as Francesca, you were saying, right, is concerned with perhaps more metaphysical questions. What's there or not there? Okay? And that's why I have two pictures up here. So these are pictures that I took myself. The first one was taken actually on Christmas. Right? I was going to see my family, and my partner took this picture in the car while we were going to see it. Right? So credit to Kelly, some of y'all's professor in reading fiction. She took this picture. Credit where credit is due. So this picture here on the Samuel de Champlain Bridge, why might this be considered something like eerie, based off of what Fisher was defining it as, right? Something missing. Yeah.
The fog.
Okay, the fog.
You're not really cruising on the road.
Yeah.
That you can stay there wherever happens. It is a bit unsettling. So constantly wondering the lack of information.
Good. My mind is, as I was driving, kind of had to fill in the gap of what the road was, right? You can't really get down here because there were no cars in this particular shot, but, this is maybe 10 feet ahead of the car, right? The car starts here, and maybe 10 feet away, that's where the fog starts. Okay? So it's not a lot. So a lot of it would have to, be my imagination of thinking, well, I kind of know what a road looks like. And I've been on this bridge before, so I'm just going to aim and hope for the best type of thing, right? Which is an incredibly eerie thing to have happen to you, right? Because there's something missing that should be there, right? And yet the fog kind of blocks it off. Liam, you have a very confused look on your face.
That's not eerie.
I'm sorry?
That's not eerie.
Why not? So why wouldn't it be eerie?
Because when I come from France in the countryside, every winter, every day, it's like that.
Okay, good. So that's actually a really good point, right? Because we don't have this every day here, right? So for me, right, it is rather eerie to see something like this. But I think that's a really good point. For someone like you in the French countryside, it's the most normal thing in the world, right? There's another eerie thing about that picture in particular, especially if you consider that it's taken on Christmas. Where's the snow? Right? Now, obviously, this is due to climate change and all of that, but it does add a little bit of a dimension to it, right? Of something missing, which for really until the 21st century had been there almost every year, right? So there's something missing from that. Okay? So I know, Liam, from your perspective, maybe you wouldn't have as much snow in the countryside of France, but still, the example in this case might be worth having. What about the second picture? It's focused in on something very specific in the middle. So this picture was taken literally 2 blocks away from where I live. If anyone has ever been to Little Italy, right, or Jean Talon Station, this is literally right beside it. Okay. Does anyone know what that symbol is on the... Oh, sorry, I don't know if it's clear, right? Do you see this symbol here? I might pop it up, right?
I don't know.
You don't see it? Okay. It just looks like bricks? Okay. Let's see if I can't... damn. Hold on. Let's see if I can't. That's already... Do we kind of see it here? It looks like a cross. It's not a cross, though. Again, looks like it. It's not it. Oh, it's so close. No. But it is related to violence. Think again, Little Italy. It's related to a sword, but it's not that.
Backstabbing syndrome.
Okay, we're just going to keep making associations. So this was built in the 1920s in Little Italy. What was happening in Italy in the 1920s? No, not quite World War II, but we're leading up to it. Someone was rising to power that was related to World War II in Italy. Thank you. Right? Mussolini. For those of you who are not aware, this is the symbol of Italian fascism, right? And it's right there on a building that is open to the public, right? Just down the street, actually, from that, there's a church called Saint Cécile, which is just above the Jean Talon Market, if ever you're in that area. And it literally has a fresco of Benito Mussolini dressed up as Pope, right? That's still around in Montreal. And I'm not going to be here saying that, we should cancel that or tear down the church. That's not what I'm saying. Although I'm not a huge fan of fascism, gotta say. What I am saying, right, is that this is a really good example of, again, these impositions onto our world that are slightly off, right? It comes from a very specific time, right, in Montreal's history, when a lot of Italian immigrants were coming over during the 1920s and still had this association with the old country, okay? And we hadn't quite come to the realization, or at least a lot of people here hadn't quite come to the realization that Mussolini was the horrible person that he actually, was. And so there was still this willingness to associate him with some kind of national glory and national belonging, right? Which is why there's all kinds of symbols associated to him in Little Italy, right? And of course, today we look at this in the 21st century, knowing, right, what Mussolini did, right, being a horrible dictator, literally the originator of fascism, right, as we know it. And it seems off, right? We have a disconnect with place and time because we don't expect this type of thing in Montreal, okay? So yeah, I just thought that these were like two interesting examples, right, to demonstrate what Fisher was getting at, right? Yes, Adam.
Not completely feel wrong,
Uh-huh.
but just like the pull it's on, just makes me think it's like a hand like grabbing on the marble.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually don't know like what the rest of the iconography is related to, right? So it's as good of an interpretation as any, but yeah, sure, why not? But something else that Fisher brings up, right, in his article that I think is really cool, or at least really interesting, is the concept of hauntology, right, which is something that you may or may not have heard of. It had a bit of a moment in literary studies as a method of analysis. But what hauntology kind of represents is, again, a form of the weird, right? Where something from the past is still haunting our perceptions of the present. Okay? So again, very much inspired by psychoanalytic concepts. This is the symbol of Italian fascism, right? A symbol firmly rooted in the past, and yet it kind of haunts the imagination and the landscape of current day Montreal in being just there, right? Has anyone ever seen the first Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie, right? Not Tomorrow Never Dies. GoldenEye. No, this is way before y'all were born. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to make that reference. If ever you want a perfect example of hauntology, you can look at the introduction song of that movie, because it happens right after the fall of the Soviet Union, and all that intro is literally like falling hammer and sickles and falling statues of Lenin and Stalin all over the place, right? And it's just haunting the actual movie. Anyway, this is a reference that no one is getting because no one has seen that movie, so I'm just going to move right along. It's an okay movie if ever you want like a fun time on a Friday night. You can put some popcorn on and watch GoldenEye. It's probably the better one of the Pierce Brosnan movies. Anyway, does that all make sense to everyone in some way, shape, or form? Okay, cool. In short, the mind is a weird, beautiful, terrifying place, right? And we often need to try to figure it out, or we want to try to figure it out, because it tells us a lot about ourselves. If you wanted to kind of dumb that down into a few words. So I'm just looking through my notes here. We've talked about repression, the unconscious. I guess we can talk about id, ego, and superego. That's probably the other major concept that people associate with psychoanalysis, right? I do have a question related to that, so I'll kind of, I just want to talk about it really, really quickly. Basically, do we know what id, ego, and superego is? Some people, okay? Who wants to explain it, or try to explain what the difference is, for those of you who nodded yes? Liam, do you want to take a shot?
I don't know how it's called in English or in French. Voilà, studié il regarde le moi, le ça, et le surmoi.
So id, ego, superego. So that's literally that. So how would you define moi or id?
The conscious regard.
Okay, so good.
Or the desire, the want.
Yeah.
The superego is the restriction to be fit in society.
Yeah. Okay, so if we wanted to put it in different terms, right? Id, right? Sa. Sorry, I missed up, but yeah, sa, id, literal translation in English, it, right? That's where the German term comes from, id, it. right, is our internalized desires, what we were talking about before, right? Death drives is an aspect of id, right? Our personal desires, right? I like to drink 16 cups of coffee and, have a headache at the end, but I feel good while I drink that coffee. So that's, my id speaking to me, right? Eating a pizza, even though you have leftovers in the fridge, because you just feel like eating a pizza, is your id talking to you as well, right? It's the desires that come out, and they're not necessarily good for you, but you respond to them anyway because why not have that pizza? You deserve it, right? The ego, right? Moi, ego, I, right? Is, if you want to simplify it, the conscious self, right? The rational self. Ego is the person that says, or the thing in your mind that says, you still have that fish in the fridge. You shouldn't order a pizza because if you do, the fish is going to go bad and then you're going to feel bad, right? So that's the ego. Or even the ego saying, you don't have it in your budget to order the pizza, right? Because you're a student and you don't work full time, so you shouldn't order that pizza. And instead you should actually, eat your broccoli or whatever. Okay? Whereas superego is, I think you're absolutely correct, right? Those restrictions, but specifically, right, internalized restrictions. Some people compare it to some kind of ideological imposition, right? We have norms in society that we all kind of respect, right? Without actually thinking about it, okay? I couldn't necessarily, or I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable coming to school and teaching to you all in my pajamas, right? That's a really simple example here, but there are certain professional standards, right, or internalized restrictions that actually stop me from doing that. There's nothing legally stopping me, right? There's no law that says I cannot come to class and speak in front of all of you in my How the Grinch Stole Christmas pajamas, right? Which my mom got me when I was 10. But that wouldn't be technically a problem, but it would be a social problem, right? It would be an internalized problem that wouldn't quite pass for a lot of people. Right? I'm using this as a simple example, but this can go beyond just the straightforward, simple example of pajamas. It can be political in nature. It can be psychological in nature. It can be all kinds of things. Okay. Actually, to relate it to what we're going to be talking about later, right? There are figures of authority in both stories that we read for today. In the Hell Screen, there's a king. In the Penal Colony, there's the kind of superintendent, the colonial person who actually controls the machine, right? They can be products, right, of some kind of authority, right? They act very much with internalized notions of what they should or shouldn't do as authorities, right? For a long time, we considered kings to be divinely appointed, right? That's a kind of internalized restriction. There was nothing that there was no God that actually placed those kings down onto a throne, right? It was societal norms that kind of internalized and expected that to be true. Okay? So it can work on political functions as well. Does that make sense for everyone? Yeah? Cool. You might have noticed that this is going to be like kind of my closing thoughts on this before I let you take a break. You might have noticed that we've been focusing a lot on Freud, right? Not because he's the only psychoanalyst to ever have, been around. Far from it, right? There's a really interesting set of psychoanalytic thinkers that still produce very interesting works to this very day, right? Todd McGowan, for example, is a really good one. Mari Rudy recently passed away, but she was really good. And they're very active in cultural spheres like film studies and literary studies and so on. I'm talking about Freud in particular today, in part because this is more of an introductory view into what psychoanalysis can bring to literature, right? And also because he was the major figure to inspire specifically literary analysis through this perspective, right? His next major successor, right, a man by the name of Jacques Lacan, right, who was a French thinker, did have a huge influence in the field of psychoanalysis, but less so in the realm of literature specifically. So, we can talk about him. I personally know less about his work, so I don't feel necessarily as comfortable lecturing on it. But also because he did have a slightly less significant impact on the foundations of psychoanalytic theory that we're talking about today. So I just wanted to kind of cap off on that particular idea. Okay, before I let you take a break, if we wanted to put it down into simple terms, right, a lot of what we've spoken about, these are the kinds of questions, right, that psychoanalytic thinkers ask of literature. So it might seem like a huge block of text. A lot of these questions are, there's just one question, and I often pose the question in a slightly different way, right? So for example, how can characters' behavior be understood in terms of their core issues? Their core issues being, right, I hate my dad, I'm depressed, I have an eating disorder, right, whatever, right? So how do these issues, right, manifest themselves in a character, right? And how does the literature actually tell us about these issues, right? Sometimes they are very subtly indicated, sometimes less so. Okay? This second one relates more to family conflicts, which is an aspect that we've talked about very, very briefly. The classic example being the Oedipal complex, right, based off of the play Oedipus Rex, which I hope some of you have read, right? Again, classic Greek story. Guy grows up, ends up killing his father, marrying his mom, kills himself at the end, right? So that would be a perfect example of the Oedipal complex, because that's literally where it comes from. But as I mentioned, Freud would pick it up and also apply it to Hamlet, right? Which is literally a story about him wanting to kill his surrogate father after his own real father died. And also how, well, at least Freud sees him and his mother having a little bit of a deeper relationship that they actually do, or that they actually state. So there's a bit of literary analysis to go there, but if we even want to parse it out a little bit more, right, I wrote the question as, in what way does the work illustrate rivalry between family, the Oedipal complex, or any other psychoanalytic family dynamic, right? How do you respond to the family members around you? For what reason? Are you repressing something, etc.? If we want to take a work that we've already talked about, right, Fall of the House of Usher, there's an interesting family dynamic that we brought up in that one, right? The incest relationship between the Ushers. I'm sure Freud, again, would have a field day with that one. I don't know if he ever actually wrote on Fall of the House of Usher, but this kind of dynamic is very interesting to a psychoanalytic thinker. Okay? Why might it emerge in that way? What effect does it have on the character's psychology? Okay? Right, so this third one is specifically related to things like the death drive, our desire for self-destruction, metaphorical or literal, often metaphorical. So how can a character's behavior or the events in the story or the images be explained in terms of a fear of death? Or, as I mentioned below, right, it can even manifest itself in destructive sexuality. Right? There's all kinds of ways that psychoanalytic thinkers, I keep fudging that word, psychoanalytic thinkers approach these questions. And finally, this is the one that started it all. In what way can we view a literary work as analogous to a dream? So, as we talked about, dreams often feature symbols that are hidden to the person experiencing the dream, and you need to parse them out, right? So are there ways that either that there are recurring symbols that are related to dreams, or does the character, the main character itself, or himself or herself actually dream in a particular way? Is there kind of an expression of unconscious desires expressed in the story? This one might come up a little bit later when we talk about the hell screen, right? In what way are unconscious desires manifested in some dreamlike state or dreamlike quality? And I just gave a few examples, right? Any symbols that might be related to death, the unconscious, or sex are ones that absolutely interest literary analysts of this persuasion. So I hope I didn't scare you too much. I know it can be a little bit daunting to talk about something like this, right? But I do think it is, again, very relevant. As the Fisher article pointed out, or the introduction, it is an inherently weird phenomena to examine your mind, right? In a good way. Right? It's not necessarily something that you want to shy away from, but it is something that, when you actually have to face it, can be somewhat terrifying. Okay. How about we take a break? I've been speaking for a little bit over an hour at this point. Take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we'll actually talk about the short stories. Okay? Here, I'll actually put, these are the questions I will be asking about the short stories. So if you want to think about them or ruminate, that's fine, but I'll be asking them again once we come back. All right, come to me if you have any questions. Shall we get started again? So, 2 short stories for today. I don't know. Yeah, we have enough time. We'll certainly be able to touch upon a little bit of both. I don't know if there's one that we're going to be talking about more than the other, right? If there was a preference on either of your end between the two. But we'll start very simply, because I think at least one of them is a little bit more complicated than the other, perhaps. Who wants to start with just a basic summary, right? How would you summarize what happened in, let's just go in order. In the Penal Colony. What's that about? What happens? Yeah.
Fanaticism leads a man to his own death.
Okay. Fanaticism leads a man to his own death. Good. I think I can get behind that. Does anyone want to add to that? Who are the main characters? What do they actually do? Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. The traveler, the officer, the soldier, and the condemned.
Okay. And what do they do? Someone other than Adam? What's the actual, action in the story? Yeah.
Machine needle thing?
Yeah, a machine needle thing-ish.
That's the sentence on the person's body as a punishment.
Yep.
Very weird.
Oh, you don't say. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Minhee, you had your hand up.
To the traveler asked.
Okay.
And the traveler, he said it later on, kind of says no to it, which leads to the officer.
Okay. Good. Anything we want to add to that? Yes.
The commander had asked to kind of judge the execution,
right.
And that's why the traveler was present at the execution.
Right. So does the traveler have any justice background as far as we know? It doesn't really say, does it? So he's just kind of this random person asked to judge, right? Yeah. Okay.
So
from whom though? Yeah. That's par for the course. Has anyone ever read another Kafka story aside from this one? Yeah.
Metamorphosis.
Yeah, Metamorphosis. Yeah, probably. That's the most famous one. For those of you who don't know, most of his stories would actually go unfinished, right? The Metamorphosis was one of those rare ones that actually did make it to the actual end of publication. The other major one that he's known for is The Trial, right, which is just this big bureaucratic parody of this guy sentenced to a crime that he has no idea what it is and has to go through this whole building trying to figure it out and gets tossed back and forth. That one was also never finished, and it's still one of his most famous works. So he kind of spent his life ruminating on these absurd and inherently strange situations that he saw. And I think that's kind of part of the charm in some ways, or the interest of those stories. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're charming. But the interest of those stories is kind of their unfinished nature, right? It's never quite something that has any satisfying resolution. right? Or even a satisfying beginning, right? Like you were saying, Francesca, there's letters of recommendation, but we never get that knowledge of who gave it, for what reason, for what position exactly. It just starts there, right? Cold open, and it basically leads us to ask questions from the very start. Okay, so that's good. What about the hell screen? Who wants to try to summarize that one or give us the key components of that one? Of course, that's where I took the image of for this PowerPoint, right? It's supposed to be a section of the said screen. Anyone want to try to give me the Cliff Notes version of the Spark Notes, maybe the version? Yeah.
Artist is like commissioned to draw like a scene of hell from the work because he wants a daughter, but the artist like needs to see the situation in person or like in his dreams. So he goes up to the Lord, and then eventually that ends in his daughter being burned.
Okay, so you packed a lot of the elements. So yes, in short, an artist is commissioned to draw a section of hell, right? Not Christian hell as we would understand it, right? In this case, it's in feudal Japan. It would be the equivalent of like some kind of Buddhist hell. I think Buddhism, right? As hell, yeah. So Buddhist hell, and it leads to all kinds of terrible things happening, like the artist putting more and more of himself into the actual painting, and leading to it actually paralleling real life. His daughter was burned. Do we know why exactly? What was the reason for that?
Sure.
For what?
See something somebody.
So there's maybe a bit of machinations going on, right? Absolutely. Anything else we want to add to that? Yeah. There's also a monkey. Good.
Who has the same name as the painter,
Uh-huh.
which is also interesting because they call the painter Monkey Hide.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they could consider like royal characters or she's a monkey.
Yeah. He, she. There's a monkey. It's certainly there. Yeah. Good. What do we? I didn't put a question about the monkey, so we can maybe come back to it a little bit later. Anything else? So far, so good. Yes.
The way the painted picture doesn't seem normal.
Yes.
He used this model is very weird way.
Yeah.
For example, threatening him with a hole for me it doesn't normal.
No, I think that's absolutely fair, right? Yeah, the painting takes place. The story, sorry, takes place in the past, right? In some kind of medieval time. But the techniques that are implied to be used in the painting, right, or said to be used, it make it so that it's not quite what was expected of paintings at the time. Not just in what is actually depicted in the painting, which, of course, hell in this case, which can lead to all kinds of interpretations. But also, it seems like the actual techniques might have been something particularly difficult to understand for the characters, right? Great. Excellent. Anything else? Okay. Yes. Yes. The painter kills himself at the end, right? Major point to bring up here. So I hope you're already starting to see some of the connections to what we were talking about at the start, right? In the first part of class about psychology and perhaps repressed or unconscious or perhaps super egoic ideas, right? So I think it's been working so far. I would encourage you again to get into teams, but I'm not going to force you. I would like you to actually think through some of these questions, right? And then we'll come back to the front and talk about them. I actually did separate some of the questions. So some of them are specifically for the Penal Colony. Some of them are specifically for the Hell Screen. The last three at the bottom are meant to be for both, right? Or for either. You can kind of take it in whatever direction you want with this. Okay. So go ahead for a few minutes, right? I want you to find specific examples, right? Of whatever your answer may be, find an example in the text to back yourself up. Take another 2 minutes and then we'll come back to the front. It's, again, as usual, it's fine if you haven't answered every single question.
Nah.
Not today. So, what do we want to start with? The Penal Colony or the Hell Screen? All right, we'll just go in order then. So, The Penal Colony. I am curious. So yeah, how does the officer's devotion to the execution machine function as an expression of some kind of unconscious drive? Right? Now, obviously, this is a very interpretative question, right? We glanced over the idea of drives, but I'm curious what you all thought and came up with from your own perspectives. Is there anything in particular that might have jumped out to you from the text? And I should have actually, while we were at it, while you think of your answers, I'm just going to open up my versions of it here. Oh, I thought I had them here. I have them on my tablet then. It's fine. Anyone? You know I'm not going to give you the answers.
I think
Yeah.
so. His observation raised of the commandant his function is some unconscious drives. The end of story, it is revealed that there's the grave over the commandant. The officer tried to dig up at night, but failed. This indicates that he is faithful attitude to his predecessor. And also there is some inscription of prophecy. The word commandment we conquest of the colony, such as we rise. And this faith rooted his unconscious mind.
Yeah.
So that he by this mindedness he keep maintaining the old machine. Maybe symbolizes his own commandment. I remember that throughout the story he often mentioned his own commandment when described to this machine to Hebrew. So I think it is very rooted observation for commandment.
Yeah.
On drives.
I think that's really good. So for those of you who might not have caught that, you can turn to the very end of the story, right? Where we have some kind of indication. Here rests the old commandment. His followers, who are now not permitted to have a name, buried him in this grave and erected this stone. There exists a prophecy that the commandant will rise again after a certain number of years, and from this house will lead his followers to a reconquest of the colony. Is that what you were referring to, right? That section? Yeah. Okay. And yeah, there is this implication throughout the story, or there's constant references throughout the story to previous commandants, right? And there's what the point that was being made here is that there's an unconscious drive to kind of fulfill some kind of prophecy in this case, or to live up to the expectations of previous commandants, or perhaps even the expectations of what a commandant should be, right? Am I kind of summarizing well your ideas here? Yeah. Okay. You can absolutely have said no if I completely butchered your idea here, but and this is kind of paralleled right at the start, right? If we go back to the very beginning of the story, it does mention that it's something that isn't really done anymore, right? Like the machine itself is just kind of there, and people use it seemingly out of some kind of sense of tradition or obligation throughout. And so there seems to be this willingness, at least an unconscious willingness, to keep that going just because it's always been there, right? And that the devotion that the officer has seems to be some kind of willingness to maintain the illusion that this is always useful, right? Or that it will always be useful. This might be as good of a time as any to mention this. I actually almost assigned this text or put this text in the syllabus for our topic for next week, which is on post-colonial / decolonial literature, right? Some of you might want to make parallels there between how we frame colonized or post-colonial nations and the way that Kafka kind of frames this. We're talking about it in the lens of psychological behavior here, but I think there's also some interesting parallels to make with what we just brought up. Good. Anything else that we brought up for that first question? Yes, Mia. Okay. Yeah.
Also, he's so indifferent about it, which is why I'm like, maybe it's not one of his drives, so like it's obvious that.
Yeah, but the indifference is kind of what also brings it back to being realistic, right? It's maybe some interpretation might be it's so repressed or it's so unconscious that you don't even feel it, right? But I get what you're going for, right? Just because something is obvious, by the way, doesn't mean it's a bad answer at all, right? And it does fit in as well. Did I put it somewhere? Well, no. Like, I guess it kind of fits in with the second question, right? Of death drive, or at least some kind of willingness to subject himself to a machine, right? Some of you might have thought of a willingness to self-destruction or a death drive, which I think fits in with what you were saying, Mia, with, I keep calling you Mia, I just want to make sure it is that. Yeah, okay, good. Sometimes it does actually come out as inflicting pain onto others, right? You actively push that away from yourself onto others. So I don't think it's a ridiculous claim at all. I think there's something there, right? Is there a point in the text where that would kind of pop out to you? Did you highlight a particular section that would? No? Okay. It is still like there. I agree with you. Yeah. Anyone else want to take a shot at that question? Yeah. The first one. Sorry, we're still on the first one. But if no one has anything else to add for the first one, we will go to the second one. Yeah, these are really good so far. So what you should start to notice already, right? There is, again, a certain level of interpretation here, right? It is a less strict form of literary analysis than might be expected from something like we talked about last week in structuralism. But I think it can still be rather fruitful. Okay, let's go with question number 2. How does this why does the officer willingly subject himself to something? Yeah.
It's like opposite to like the unconscious of the series actually, but
Good.
I thought that maybe he really did not want to do some shit in the first place, as he like also thought of it as like unjust, and the fact that he had to be in charge was kind of him like be decided. So the opposition from the traveler was going like quote unquote freed him from the obligation, and simultaneously used that moment to solve from like the wrath he had been feeling and used the machine that had been torturing him.
Did we all catch that? Right? It is a crushing thing, right? A soul-crushing thing to inflict pain onto others. It kind of expands off of what we were just talking about. On one level, we might say he has a willingness. The officer in charge has a willingness to actually inflict pain, and that's some kind of death drive desire inflicted onto another person. But on the other hand, it might just be the fact that he subjects himself to the machine at the end might be an indicator that it was actually soul-crushing, right? Which says a lot, actually, about how we perceive, actual events in real life that have actually been rather similar, right? When someone does something terrible and then feels great regret about it after, right? You're willing to subject yourself on some level to a similar kind of pain as that which you did, or you sometimes double down and refuse, right? And perhaps repress it even more from your memory and refuse to actually acknowledge it. But I really like that perspective, right? Definitely. Kind of atonement for the sins of both him and his predecessors, in a sense. Good. Yes. Yeah.
It didn't read the same story.
Yeah.
Because to me,
yeah,
like it looked like the officer was actually enjoying. He was actually excited to see the pain inflicted like on the victim.
What kind of textual evidence do you pull for that? I'm not saying you're wrong, but this goes to show that like literary interpretation. Yeah. Yeah.
Got like so carried away that he kind of like embraced him, and then he like remembered himself. I don't have like the exact, but the vibes that I got, it was that he was like into pain and he was happy to use it. Interesting. Adam, you were nodding yes. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that? Maybe while you find the passage, if you want. No, I was talking to. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much Adam, and he did seem very excited, and every time the traveler was asking questions about it, he went to immediately get back to it.
Okay.
Like he was answering this very fast and started immediately talking about it, like on a tangent, until the traveler kept cutting him off again and again, and then time ran out.
Good. Yes.
I feel like he was more excited about like the machine and the process itself than like the actual execution.
Okay. Yeah.
He's obsessed with the idea of the old commander. Like, he's very enamored with this whole thing, and he really wants to carry it out. And I feel that the second question, I think maybe it's like a punishment or a way to like join the old commander because he failed.
Right. Oh, okay.
Like,
Okay. Interesting. Did you find the passage?
Second novel, I found another one.
Yeah.
Can you read it?
Yeah. Go ahead.
He finished up on the machine with a smile. He looked over at the whole thing and all parts, and this time closed the cover on inscriber. And there's also a part where he said, climbed down, looked into the hole, and then at the condemned van, he observed with satisfaction that his clothes had been pulled out. I don't know, like to me, it just seems like he was really excited to like start the process.
So I think these are all really, really good points, right? What I would say to the excitement part is it can be seen as two ways. Either, like you're saying, that it's really something that he does enjoy, right? Some other psychoanalytic perspectives might say the fact that he's enjoying these particular moments, hugging the traveler, like you were saying, or anything like that, are moments when his unconscious like happiness or desire for happiness are kind of coming through amidst like the entire trauma of the thing, right? I'm not saying right one is better than the other, but I'm just kind of adding on to what you're saying here. But that's really good. Carlos, did you have anything to add in the back?
Wrong. But
Okay.
he was in the machine.
Yeah.
At some point, he was really happy.
Mhm.
He even told the condemned man, saying, like, "Oh, you're free man." And even the man was like, he was confused,
Yeah.
sure to understand what he just said. But then the officer said again, "You're a free man. You can go."
Yeah.
So that's how he expresses his pleasure to him.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Or some kind of desire, right? In some way, shape, or form. Yeah, Mia, you had mentioned something, and I wanted to come back to it, and then I forgot. What was the main point that you had brought up in relation to all of this? You had said something, just like the last thing you said. What was it? Okay, yeah, that's right, right. So self-punishment, right? And this is kind of something that you do see every once in a while as well. It kind of fits in with what we were talking about earlier, right? It's this idea of having failed, right? Or having failed specifically in what we imagine our task to be, right? Which at the end of the day is kind of represented by the machine. It might seem like a simple thing, but when you were, Maimuna, when you were saying this needle thing that we're not quite sure what it is, right? I think Kafka is deliberately not giving us a precise definition of what the machine really looks like or does, right? As we saw with the other images that I pulled up, right? There's all kinds of artist interpretations of it. So in a way, like the machine is itself an imagining of the commander's own tasks, right? What he should do. And one of the things that people who study psychoanalysis kind of claim, right, is that you can never quite live up to the expectations that you set for yourself, right? And I'm sure you see this on a regular basis, right? And obviously not, I hope, in a horrifying context like in this story. I hope none of you torture people with weird needle machines. But how many of you during your week set yourselves like 10 or 15 tasks to do and only reach like 5, right? And then you feel super disappointed with yourself to the point where you're like, well, I'm just this huge failure, right? And then you order a pizza and cry in your bed, right? Yes, I'm coming back to the pizza. But this is like a small scale and personalized version of what I think you're getting at, Mia, right? Is the expectations we set for ourselves can also be the source of our own downfall and the source of our own failures, right? I think that's a really good point, right? Anything else we want to add to that? I'm glad you guys are like picking up on these things. These are really good points, actually. Yeah. Any final thoughts on the second question? Okay. Before we move on fully to the health screen, we'll just kind of cover the 3 here from the perspective of the penal colony. We kind of addressed this a little bit. What kind of superegoic or moral or ideological codes might the commander or even the traveler, maybe some of you thought it was more of the traveler who was the superego, what kind of moral or ideological codes might be represented in the story? Did anyone think of that? Yeah. No, that's fine.
The traveler said that he felt that it was wrong. It wasn't his place to say anything because it had like a background over it.
Good. Yeah, not my place to say anything, right? And we see this quite often again in the 21st century in like our liberal world order that we do. Oh, that's just someone else's culture. I won't necessarily talk about it because it's not my place to say anything, right? And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying you see that quite often, right? That kind of discourse. And it is a rather internalized form of ideology, right? None of us really question that perspective, or very few question it publicly, right? Oh, it's someone else. We just kind of internalize it and leave it alone. Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. And then Francesca.
An officer, when he like puts himself in the machine, the words that he uses to describe is be just.
Good. Say more. Why would that be a moral code or an ideological code? Be just.
To those words, be just important.
Yes. Good. Right. So on the surface level, right, be just, imploring justice in some way, shape, or form, demanding that whatever happens, justice be carried out. Whose justice? Who decided that this was just? Why? Right? Obviously, Kafka doesn't answer this because that would defeat the purpose of this particular story. But it does get at something really interesting, is that often these ideas of justice that we have, right, are what in society? Completely arbitrary, right? And I'm not saying, again, that it's a bad thing, right? I think it's good that we have some sense of justice. But at the end of the day, they are very much random occurrences that we've all kind of agreed upon, right? And the fact that he implores this imaginary machine, right, in a fictional penal colony to be just, right, does say a lot about our constructions of justice. Great, good. Francesca, you had your hand up.
When in the old guard, they all supported they made kind of like a show of it.
Yes.
The execution. Yeah. And with the new commandant, it's not at all the case.
Yeah.
It kind of reduces the power of the officers. Before he was, because it was such a big event, like he must have had kind of like a power trip.
Sure.
Probably.
Yeah.
And I guess he's trying to hold on to the old ways by doing this, but I don't know where my thought went.
Yeah, but just to pick up on that, we kind of hit on this a little bit before with the first question, but it seemed like before it was much more an event, and something happened between the last commandant and this new one where it's no longer the case. And yet the ceremony, right, it is in many ways a ceremony, the sacrificial ceremony, is still carried out. It's this internalized, again, moral code that says, well, it's justice to do this, right? And so even if we all kind of hate it, there's something compelling us to keep going, right? And again, I'm sure you can find a million examples in contemporary society of how this is reflected, right? We all know, just to take an easy example, most of the clothes we wear were made by sweatshop workers in, what we very broadly call third world countries for $2 a day or something like that, right? We all know that. And yet we keep going and we just kind of say, well, we're not gonna change it. And so it's just gonna be what it is, right? I still need clothes and I still have very minimal budget. So, screw the sweatshop worker in Bangladesh, right? And again, I'm putting it in like very crude terms here, but it's a very similar idea of these internalized forms of, in this case, violence that are being enacted, or any kind of desire to change or not change the system. Because at the end of the day, if we bring it back to the pleasure principle or the death drive or anything like that, we kind of like it. And we kind of enjoy the ease that it brings us, right? It's again, very confronting thing to face, right? Our own kind of hellish desires. Good. Yes. Mm-hmm.
It could be an allegory for the Bible.
Okay, say more.
Well, they mention a martyred face at one point, and also at the end when they say his dollars are going to rise again, or he's going to rise again.
Yeah.
So maybe when the officer put himself sacrificed himself, basically.
Yeah.
He thought he would kind of be like a Christ figure to bring back the old ways.
I think that, did anyone else catch that? Yeah, or get that impression? As some kind of, Jesus-like figure or Christ-like figure? Yeah, absolutely. I would say that that's there, right? And it is a kind of a reinforced moral code, right? We're not necessarily aware of it. Let's just take the Canadian example of this. We're technically in a secular state, right? We are in a state that has officially separated church and state. Okay, that is on paper what it is. And yet, the laws that we have, right, in the Constitution, for example, or our Confederation, right, documents, are so firmly inspired by things like the Ten Commandments, right, or Bible verses and the teachings of that whole religion, that it's just become ingrained, even if we do want to separate it from our society formally, right? And I don't think that's what Kafka is saying, obviously, necessarily in this story, but I do think that this idea of a kind of ingrained desire to be martyred, right, definitely has parallels to Christianity or how people perceive that, right? Yeah. By the way, that's kind of like that's one of the reasons why you no longer the Catholic Church kind of banned martyrs, right, or stopped accepting martyrs as saints and stuff like that, because they didn't want people to actually like start killing themselves for the purposes of that faith. So there's a lot there. Yeah. Good. Okay. Anything else we want to add to that? This is really good. Yeah. There's no tangents. It's weird fiction. It's fine.
Reminded me of the trolley drama because the traveler's decision to intervene and say no to like the device because he thought it was harmful and political, it eventually ended up in the death of another man, the officer.
Yeah.
So kind of like made me think, is it should you intervene and say no because it goes against your moral codes or
Yeah, you can think of it in the terms of more of the trolley problem. Absolutely. I didn't think of that personally, but yeah, I think there's definitely a valid take there. Sure. Great. Anything else? Good. These are all excellent. We already talked about that prior to last one. In what ways do the punished victims serve as projections for hidden guilt? We kind of brought that up already, so we'll kind of move on. Did anyone think of the last question on the uncanny? The familiar and the strange kind of overlapping, how that might say that? Yeah. Do you want to finish on the penal colony and then we'll move on to the hell screen? Yeah.
On the machine itself, it's, I guess, like a really big exaggeration version of just an execution.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
So it's like, what its purpose, but it's like, this does not exist. I mean, that's like uncanny. You recognize its purpose, you don't know what.
Yeah.
I feel like there's something really eerie about cruel and unusual punishments. Like punishments, okay, yeah, you do a crime, whatever. Like you deserve to be punished, depending on the extent. But some punishments are so I have strange in my head. That's not the word.
Yeah, like out of place.
Out of place. That it's strange. It's
okay. Yeah. You had your hand up. Yeah.
Usually they're quick, unless you're talking about like this.
Okay. Yeah.
Like did all this torture, but you're doing anything.
Yeah.
Hanging someone, cutting their head off.
Yeah. Sure.
That this is very 12 hours. It's quite so unusual. It's normal thing to do in the kitchen.
Yeah. So even like that. It's the quote unquote normal, technically, right? The death penalty, especially in Kafka's time when he was writing this, would have been still a relatively common occurrence. But yeah, it's made strange by the fact that it's not quick. It's even a public event, right? Which already by Kafka's time was not as much of a thing. And then I saw your hand, which was not as much of a thing. So yeah, there is that kind of uncanniness to that. Yeah. So you had your hand up. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Like they just listened to what his like master said, and they just took him, and they didn't even explain what was gonna happen to him.
Yeah.
He was just alone with them.
Yeah. And again, to bring it back to the other Kafka story, the trial, right? That's the main thing that kicks off that story is he's condemned for a crime that he has no idea what it is. And it is a thoroughly eerie story, right? Because the very nature of the story is like, well, there's something here that shouldn't be, right? Or I'm being removed from a life or from a system of existence that I'm supposed to be a part of, right? I'm the one being erased. Yeah, so I think that's really good. Just to come back to this idea of public execution, right? There is something inherently eerie about that as well, especially for us in the 21st century. Because executions by the state are still a thing in some places of the world. Are they usually public, though? No. Yeah, go ahead.
I've seen on like Criminal Minds when
Yeah.
they do like there's like a public,
Yeah,
like let's say the victims' families,
Yes.
their presence for that.
Yeah.
And I guess depends. Let's say if you look in 20th century in the United States, even earlier lynchings, that was a public event, and it's a horrible thing that happened, and yet people were celebrating.
yeah. So we'll come back to that, but yeah.
It's public like this.
Yeah.
Like if it's the victim family, it's more like to get a sense of justice.
Good.
But when it's public, like in this story, it's for entertainment because there were like children gathering around.
Yeah.
Watch this.
Like, again, this is something that, it's something that we're not as familiar with today because we're so removed from it. Executions were a public event in the sense of like people gathered to go see that, right? Like project your mind back to a time when like TV was not a thing, right? And we have kind of become unsensitized through things like Criminal Minds or whatever to these ideas of public executions or any kind of violence, right? But it was a fact of life for a lot of people for a long time. And it was to the point where things like the guillotine or whatever would have been a public event that you could go see and, take the whole family type of thing. You laugh, but it was a thing, right? And it's a horrible thing to us in the 21st century, right? Which is what makes it eerie in hindsight, right? It's the imposition of something, it's the making public of something that now would be, on some level, behind closed doors, right? Or more privatized, not in the like capitalist sense, but in the sense of being private. So yeah, there is a bit of an eeriness or an eerie quality to that, right? Yeah, I really think that's good. Okay, I'm seeing the time fly, and I do want to get a little bit to the hell screen. So yeah, let's go with the first question with the hell screen. Does Yoshide himself see himself in his own painting? And how does art reflect his own, or how might, I should say, art reflect his own unconscious? Yeah.
Well, his art literally comes from dreams in some instances.
Good.
It's very Freudian.
Yep. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So it literally originates in his dreams. Do you have a specific passage in mind? Okay. Good. Anything else we want to add to that? So
I think
yeah.
you should see himself as a great painter in
Yeah.
his art.
Okay.
In chapter 4,
Chapter 4, for those of you who didn't hear. Mm-hmm.
he describes I, the greatest painter in Japan, was blessed across his poem. I think this suggestion of his conscious,
Good.
and which also makes him great artwork. Also, this painting reflects himself. Also, some topic of his artworks derived from his dreams.
Yeah.
As seen,
Yeah. In chapter 6, yeah.
he said to the I believe some cinema comes from his dream,
Mm-hmm.
and the king is mocking at him. You don't picture unless you see him first.
Good.
So I mean, his artwork also reflect conscious.
Absolutely. So yeah, the painting comes back again. I do want to stay on that chapter 4 that you mentioned, or section 4 that you mentioned at first. Right, several legends. No need to say how highly he esteemed himself as a painter. His paintings were so different in brushwork and coloring from those of other painters that many of his colleagues, who were on bad terms with him, considered him an impostor. Several legends affirm that the famous paintings by the ancient masters, like Kawanari, Kanaoka, and others, were so well rendered that one could smell the fragrance of the plum blossoms painted on the doors as the delicate scent wafted about in the moonlit nights. and one could also hear the courtiers painted on a screen play their flutes. But all the paintings by Yoshida seem to elicit disturbing feelings. One could cite the scene of the Goshu-shoji, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the cycle of births and deaths hung on the portal of the Ryogai temple. Right, and then he go on, right, his paintings, the critics said, were cursed, and being an eccentric, Yoshida took pride in these rumors. So, like, even in these descriptions here, there's somewhat of a dreamlike quality to them. They're not quite real, as we mentioned at the start when we were kind of summarizing him. The brushwork was completely different. The coloring was completely different. So there's simultaneously this sense in the paintings of high realism, right? This is something that comes up in the story. They're so real that they're disturbing, but like a dream, right? It looks real, but there's always something off, right? And in this case, it's the brushwork, the paintings, the colors, right? And so on. So it kind of comes back to this uncanny feeling that we often get in dreams, right? This sense that we recognize what we're seeing, and yet it is inherently strange inside of this familiar setting, right? You're walking around and you realize that you have 6 fingers instead of 5 on each hand, right? Just a really simple example, right? So it's slightly off, okay? But also, like, right before the passage that I just mentioned, where someone says, "How strange, do you really believe the deities Yoshida painted will hit him with lightning?" Right? So there's this sense of, like, the deities, these usually mythical figures, right, coming through in the paintings as well, right? I think that's really interesting. Good. Anything else we want to add? Yes. Yeah, please. Page 28. Paper 14, yeah.
Literally the last page. As for the infernal torturers, here Yoshihide paused, an enigmatic grin on his face. Infernal torturing appeared to me in my dreams almost every day and night. Bull-headed, horse-headed, or 3-faced, 6-armed demons, arrows, and torment me, beckoning me to follow them, moving their silent lips. Those are the things I can think.
Good. Yeah.
Also, completely off topic, back
Yeah.
to the Penal Colony. Would hauntology,
Okay.
mentioned here,
Yeah.
could the machine be an example of that?
Okay. Say more. How would you figure? Yeah.
Let me just see what I wrote about hauntology. Something from the past that still haunts the present. So it's a symbol of the past.
Yeah.
And it's a present. So,
Yes,
yeah.
I would say that's 100% something that you could claim. Yeah, definitely. Right. If we want to real quick do a tangent on hauntology, right? There's probably something that you can do with the health screen as well, just to bring it back to that. I don't know if any of you looked up the story. It's actually a retelling of a classical Japanese tale, right? That existed in the 13th century. And so what's kind of happening is it's both a retelling of that story, and it takes place in the 13th century when that story would have first been written down or would have first emerged. I don't know if there's actually any copies of that story that remain, or if it's only retellings of retellings type of thing. But I'm sure there's something there that can be done with the hauntological, right? What we imagine 13th century Japan to be, and how that's reflected in a 20th century story like this one, and the kind of senses that gives us of unease, or perhaps reconstructing our present moment, right, through that lens. But I really like that. Just to come back to the passage that you brought up, right? As for the infernal torturers, those are the things I cannot paint. There's a kind of dual admission here, right? It's simultaneously something that I am dreaming, right? I'm imagining, and yet the material putting on the page, right, or putting on the canvas is where it blocks, right? And it comes back to the importance of the unconscious here. Our unconscious always tells us more than we can actually express in real life. Yeah, that's what I said. Oh, did I say can paint? Well, no, exactly. Those are the things I cannot paint. Yeah. Aren't the things. Jesus Christ. Yeah. But my point remains, right? You're right. Sorry. The things that, right, there is always this lack of translation, right? That can be had. The things that he puts on, right, are things that he feels comfortable actually like expressing on the canvas. But yeah, sorry about that. That was such a terrible slip, if one were to actually put it in those terms. But I kind of lost my train of thought now because I was just kind of derailed from that, and it's not your fault. You're absolutely right to have pointed this out. Okay, we'll just move on in this case, but it's still a really good one. Those aren't the things I cannot paint. Anything else we wanted to highlight for this question? We're still on question 1 here. So we can maybe move on to the second question. How does his final act, so we mentioned it before, of him hanging himself, reflect some kind of artistic triumph, right? The self-punishment one, I think, is more on the surface level. But if anyone has anything that we want to add, but can it represent anything like an artistic triumph? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
This passage that said that because of his painting,
That's fine.
they were kind of like proud of him. And it also says that from that day on, no one, at least in the palace, spoke ill of the painting.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's like he created the.
Yeah, this is at the end, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. The last, no, the one before last.
Oh, yes. Okay. From that day on, no one, at least in the palace, spoke ill of the painter. Those who looked at the screen, even though they hated the personage, were impressed with that mysterious solemnity and with the ghastly realism of hell's torments, as if they could feel the bite of the infernal fire. Right? There is a sense that, like, the act of death, right, kind of makes the painting come together in a sense and brings it into its final form, if we want, which I think is really good and comes back to, we didn't talk about it, but how a lot of people see the death drive as well, of it being the final kind of liberation, right? Of saying, this is what will finally free me from the torment of my life, right? Is this kind of self-destructive behavior, which unfortunately, of course, some people take to the actual step of committing suicide in depressive cases, but in other cases, they see it as a genuine expression of how to make their way out of it in perhaps less final manners, but still just as destructive. Francesca, you had your hand up. Yeah. Yeah.
The not like respect, but
yeah,
kind of. It's like his quote unquote greatest masterpiece, and he can't surpass it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is again something, we talked about martyrdom just before. That's one of the reasons why martyrs again were such a thing. It's the ultimate devotion, right? If we take it in the Christian perspective that you were bringing up, right? Martyrdom is often said like it's a parallel to Christ, right? You are so devoted to that idea that you are sacrificing yourself for your beliefs. In the case of martyrdom, it often has a positive spin on it, or it's framed in that sense. In other senses, it's often framed as negative. We were talking about terrorism last class, right? Suicide bombers or anything like that is often framed in a more negative sense, but in that framework, it is very much still a self-destructive act of martyrdom. I'm not calling Yoshihide a terrorist in this case, but it's I don't think that's a good parallel to make, but it's still one example among others, right? And you see this, if we want to bring it back to the cultural for a second, you see this in music all the time, right? How many musicians have we idolized because they died young, right? I don't know if this is much of a thing still today. How many of you listen to Nirvana, right? Okay, some of you are nodding yes, right? Famously, the lead singer of Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, right, died when he was 27, right? Younger than I am, apparently. A bit older than you. I was going to say younger than you, but no. Right? Younger than I am. And the great irony is that he killed himself because he was very sad with his success, right? He had gotten so successful that it gave him too much pressure to live up to. And the great irony is that his suicide made the band even more popular, right? Because after that, they became bestsellers, even though they never produced albums again, right? That idea of self-destructive triumph is definitely a thing, that we see in real life. Yeah, totally. Anything else that we want to add to that? Yes. Yeah.
Says, what are you saying? Where to hell? Come to the burning hell. Whoever is this? Who could it be? And who's taking away? Yes, come. There your daughter is waiting for you. He joins by killing himself. He ends up putting his daughter in hell. The issue, so it's like a self. His dream is like the same thing as his.
I like that, right? This idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes, Francesca. Yeah.
Why would the yes, like I feel like that would be like maybe like his dreams, a dream that is manipulating him. But like I don't think in the story the girl does anything to deserve being in hell. On the contrary, she helps a monkey from getting beats and all that. So I don't know. That's my take.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a thing of like Buddhist hell or whatever works in a slightly different manner. If anyone knows that would be a good time to intervene because I'm not quite sure. But I see your confusion there, and especially in like our normal way of understanding, or normal in our Christian understanding of hell. Right, which is very common here. That wouldn't quite fit, but I don't know if it's different in the context of the Japanese setting. So that's a good question. Maybe an essay topic. Yes. Yeah.
What she said.
Yeah.
You bring me to sort of question.
Yeah.
But what she said, why would her daughter will end up in hell?
Yeah.
Based on the Christians' view of hell. Well, I don't think that she'll end up because she was a victim of it that helped to, let us say, bring to life this piece of art that the artist could never, or even if somebody else could ever say. But I think that maybe, based on the quotation that the petitioner just did, maybe he'll join his daughter in hell, more like he'll join the hell that, in a way, is desired to put his daughter through.
Yeah, I like that. But I like this. What we're kind of questioning here is in what way, right? Unconscious desires or dreams or all of that. Again, to come back to the, even though I slipped up there, of those are the things. Those aren't the things I cannot paint, right? The way that fiction mirrors reality, right? Or becomes reality, or becomes some sense of reality, right? Which is what makes, again, this story inherently weird, because we're not quite sure where reality begins and our dreams or our interpretations of it begin, right? So what you're all pointing to kind of points to that. Yes, there was a hand up. Yeah, please.
Carriage, he says.
What section is this?
Page 30.
Page 32?
Is a simple woman. So like maybe that's why I just feel like we don't know, maybe she did something and that's why, I don't know, it's just like I remember that I saw.
I'm just looking for okay, there it is. Section 17. Yeah. Look at the carriage, it's mine, you surely recognize it. I will set fire to the carriage and create a blazing hell before your eyes. But set fire to the carriage and create a blazing hell before your eyes, by the way. But the Lord exchanged another glance with his samurai and then resumed speaking in bitter tones. In the carriage lies a sinful woman, bound in chains. As soon as the carriage will take fire, she will die in terrible agony. It is the perfect model to finish your painting, right? Watch closely as her snow-white skin burns and sparkles braid her black hair, right? Again, right? In this case, it's fiction, and it's reality starting inspiring the actual painting and not the other way around, but you get that interplay in a really, really good way. And I really want to highlight, in the carriage lies a sinful woman, because there's a dual understanding that we can get from this. On the one hand, the internalized idea of what a sinful woman might be, right? If we read something like this, some people might have the idea of, actually committed, I don't know, a religious sin or anything like that. But sin doesn't necessarily have to have that connotation. It can be like a societal faux pas, right? Or a sin in that sense. And of course, this changes over time and place. And I want to highlight this passage in part because not only does this work with the psychoanalytic reading, but in the readings that in the types of readings that we've done before, right? If we talk about structuralist readings, which you're more than welcome to apply to other stories, right? Other than the ones that we talked about last week. What we have here is a really interesting association of terms, right? Woman with sin. Okay? This is more of a tangent than anything else, but I just want to highlight that this is the way that you can also get some really fruitful interpretations. Because women throughout history have often been associated with the more sinful half of humanity, unfortunately so. And that's, why feminism is still an important thing in the 21st century to have, to go against these ideas. But I just wanted to highlight that, and I just thought of it as you mentioned it. Francesca, do you have your hand up? Or
Just wondering, do we know who the man was in her room? The narrator walked in on her with the monkey.
No, or to be honest, because I read this like a week and a half ago, and I took notes, and I didn't take a note about that. Yeah, no, I didn't. That makes sense. Yeah. Did you have your hand up, Maimuna, as well, or no? Okay, okay, good. Okay, time is flying. Let's see. Just to come back to that, I know you had something to say about the uncanny with the hell screen, and I interrupted you to bring us back to the penal colony. Did you want to say what you were thinking about that?
That's great things that when I wrote for it, when I was like reading it, anyways, I was thinking like, well, the dad's an artist, and in real life, artists like their art is their visions, their truth, and they like live for it the same way that a mathematician like is solving this huge equation, and when he solves it, he's like completed it. He's won. So I mean, for an artist to paint is one thing. You can like look at it and you see, you feel it. You're like, okay, well, this is how it's making me feel.
Yeah.
But to actually enter the art, that's where the uncanny.
Yeah. I like that. This idea of entering the art becomes this uncanny thing, right? Kind of like how we were talking about dreams before with the little diagram that I drew at the start. Right? It goes from the conscious to brings us into the unconscious, and in that middle ground, we get this uncanny thing that might transition us into the artist's mind, perhaps, or the context. I really like that. Yeah, good. Anyone else have anything about the uncanny in the hell screen? I mean, we brought it up a little bit here and there, but we have examples of it in the painting itself, right? This thing, and you see this in real life paintings. It's not quite real, and yet you still recognize it. You see this, just to take Picasso as a really good example of that. You technically recognize, if you take his famous painting of Guernica, right? You technically recognize things in there, but they're so warped and weird that it brings them into the uncanny. Yeah. So you technically recognize a cow. Oh God, I thought I want to. There we go. So you technically recognize like animals and humans and other things in there, and yet not quite, right? There's floating heads, there's floating hands rushing through the air with candles, right? You technically can know what it is, and yet it's entirely strange in its familiarity. Right? Have we all seen this painting before? So really, I'm surprised that some of you know. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Hot take. Picasso's great, obviously. Like he's worth studying in this case. So you should definitely look into that. Okay. Any final thoughts on these? Yes. Go ahead, Francesca.
Owls are kind of creepy, and
forget if it was me or if it was another student.
Somebody mentioned that, and there is an owl in here that's kind of cat-like ears and feathers.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So that could be.
Yeah. Cat-like ears and feathers, right? I like that because you don't necessarily associate a cat with an owl, right? On the contrary, usually it's cats that hunt bird-like creatures like owls. So that might fit in more with a structuralist reading than anything else, but I would say. But yeah, it is still uncanny, right? In slightly making bizarre this very familiar creature of an owl, right? Yeah, good. Okay, we're almost done. I still want to plug in my computer because I don't want to it to die in the last seconds of this lecture. I want to finish off by coming back to things we've talked about in the first weeks, right? We started off this class by addressing romantics, right? And how they approached this great sense of awe to the world and to the universe, right? And one of the thinkers that we brought up in relation to that was Kant, right? Immanuel Kant. And one of his great discoveries is kind of what we were talking about today, right? One of the things that made reason so important for Kant was actually the fact that he kind of discovered it in the terms that we now understand it as. And what's really interesting for Kant is that the mind is kind of like an ocean, right? This vast, infinite ocean. And I think that's really an image that you can hold on to in what we're talking about today, right? We have on the surface a brain filled with ripples, and it's a very silly thing at the end of the day, right? It's this lump of gray mass, right? That's all our brain is. But what makes it so impressive is this infinite ocean behind it, I should say, right? If you want a really good example of this, how many of you can count to infinity? If anyone lifted their hand, I would actually have been very disappointed, right? Nobody can. You can't, right? And yet you can imagine that you cannot count to infinity. You have the capacity to actually conceive mentally of this idea of infinity, right? And that's kind of what we're getting at in this sense, is like the mind is much bigger than what it can actually technically perform, right? It goes so much deeper and is so much more interesting than just a simple lump of gray, I don't know what the hell technically our brain is, right? This gray muscle that we have in our skull. Gray matter or whatever. And there's this really great image that I want to end on. Oh shoot, what's it called? Voyager 1. Yes, that's it. Right. Has anyone ever seen this pale blue dot? No? Some of you have. Good. This is the last picture that was taken of the Earth by the Voyager 1 space probe before it officially could no longer see the Earth. Right? So find the Earth in this. Right? It's the pale blue dot. Right? And I think this really captures what we're talking about today, even if we didn't put it in these terms. You are one person on this speck that can imagine everything. Literally, right? You have the capacity, and that is fundamentally bizarre and beautiful and incredible. And that's kind of what psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic literary theory is getting at. Sometimes it's horrifying, like in the stories that we read, right? And other times, it's just really interesting to see how we think about things, right? Anyway, for next week, we're going to do something completely different. But keep all of these questions that I asked in mind. For next week, as usual, there's further readings. If you want to know more about psychoanalytic theory, I put Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams as a good introductory. Maybe not. He actually did introductory lectures of psychoanalysis, which is also really good. But for next week, we're going to be doing post-colonial theory and decolonial theory. Less theoretically heavy than you might imagine it. It is still very important as a thing, but it's less jargony, I feel, than things like psychoanalysis, so we'll probably have a better time of it. The two main stories that I already put on the syllabus are these two, right? Mathilde Zeller's Kashtuka and Phoenix Boudreau's Hunger. Two indigenous writers who wrote these stories for a collection of weird indigenous stories that was published only 2 years ago. So they're very recent stories. They're probably more things that we'd like to read, right, in the 21st century in terms of their style. But as I mentioned, I do think you'd get a lot out of the third story that I listed here, Algernon Blackwood's The Wendigo, which was published about 100 years ago in 1910 by a guy who had never been to Canada, as far as I know, and yet sets his story in colonial times in North America, right? In Quebec specifically, right? So yeah, I see you already nodding your head no. There's a reason why I'm giving it as a story, right? Because it offers a really good contrast between the way that people depicted the colonial moment, right? When it's a white British dude actually writing about the Wendigo, which is a Native American, I'm sorry? Yeah, a Native American spirit figure. Good. And of course, how indigenous people writing their own stories responded to that kind of literature, right? They don't explicitly reference Blackwood, but I think there's like some good parallels to make here. So the core ones are Zeller and Boudreau. If you have time, read Blackwood as a good basis for why Zeller and Blackwood are doing some interesting things. Okay? Come to me if you have any questions. If not, have a nice weekend, and I will see you next week.